Hey there, listeners. It's a pleasure and a proud moment to release episode 600 this week. In today's episode of the Ask Denis, I will cover off about episode 600 and talk a little bit about that, but also discuss the importance of taking time out to celebrate, reflect, and reset when you reach milestones. Let's discuss.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Welcome to the Ask Denis episode. This is a freestyle episode where I'm asked a question by our listeners or I share my thoughts, experiences and insights from working with many leaders around the globe. Hey there, listeners. Well, welcome to episode 601. It's a pleasure and a proud moment to release episode 600 this week. But you know what? I always think about the next one after that. So we've reached the milestone of episode 600, but this being 601, now's the first one after that milestone, and now we're on that journey again. And it's really quite a cool time, or quite cool period, and also sort of situation to be in. So wow, so just 4 years ago, this month actually, I was saying, welcome to episode 1. And my guest I should say, was outgoing CEO of Air New Zealand, a gentleman by the name of Christopher Luxon. Today, he is the Prime Minister of New Zealand. In fact, I've had a wide range of guests from people from all walks of life. Guys like Travis Chappell through to people who have come from these kind of backgrounds and levels of leadership. In fact, they've been frontline leaders to C-suite, to entrepreneurs. There are people who come from a corporate background or a small and medium-sized kind of business. They are political people. They are sporting leaders. So we've had them from all sorts of backgrounds, and I've just named a couple of the guests there, but also episode 600. If you haven't checked that out, that is Dr. Tashan Macon, and episode 500, Rhonda Viteri, right? And just these different people I've had from different backgrounds. It's just been an awesome way to experience others, but also learn from their experiences. And if you haven't checked out those episodes, go back and start listening to them. They're really, really great people. All my guests have been fantastic. In today's episode, I want to cover off about episode 600 and also discuss the importance of taking time out to celebrate, reflect, and reset when you reach milestones. If you haven't already listened to episode 600, then I highly recommend that you do so. And I just talked about my guest, and she's an awesome lady who has worked with major artists and brand around the world. Names like Usher or Dr. Dre and Pink, an organization like the USOC Winter Olympics or Burger King and the Oprah Winfrey Show, right? So just a few of the brands and artists that she's actually worked with. And the discussion was so rich. I've gone and listened to that episode twice already just to hear it more and more because it's just brilliant what Tashan was actually sharing with us. And the discussion covered off a lot of things. And some of the items were, we talked about the city of champions and the champion mindset, but also leadership is a talent, not a title. So if you haven't already, as I said before, check out episode 600. And I know that you're going to actually get a lot from that actual episode. Okay, so we've hit episode 600. And that's all very good. And yes, it's time that we are celebrating here around reaching that milestone. But you know what? I think there's been a few key words that keep coming up for me when I think about the journey of going from 4 years ago, from episode 0, actually, of me introducing the actual podcast through to episode 600 now. And here are just some of those words that sort of come up for me as I think about the journey. One is, of course, is discipline. And in episode 600, we talk about that word and we talk about how it's very important. Focus is another one, around you focusing in and focusing on the goal or focusing on what you need to get done. But one of the biggest words that people keep talking to me about what I've done is around consistency, actually showing up all the time. And that's the one thing about leaders is that how are you showing up all the time? And is it on a consistent basis? In other words, you're not like one person one day and then tomorrow you're a totally different leader, right? Because that actually sends people a lot of mixed messages. Another word is quality. And I'm just getting some new T-shirts done, and the T-shirt's a new logo that we have. And the reason I'm going to the new logo is quite interesting because a lot of people were looking at the sort of leadership is changing, the colouring and so forth. They actually thought it was a political party here in New Zealand. I'm like, no, it's my podcast. People didn't realise it was a podcast, even though we had the microphone icon there as well. So what we've done is put a different icon of microphone in the middle and behind the banner of leadership is changing. And we've added the word podcast. And so then people will know what that is. But I went to a couple of suppliers who are global suppliers, whereby I could give the link to people and they could go on and order a T-shirt, pay for it, and have it delivered to them. And I tested them both. And the quality is crap. It's not very nice at all. It's not good at all. And the quality of printing that I have had done by a printer that I'm using here in New Zealand, or actually in Wellington, fantastic. The blue that they're using, for some reason, I don't know why these other suppliers came out different, but these guys, it just pops. And so that's why we're doing this. But you know what? It's the quality. So the icon or the logo and the T-shirt is of quality. The T-shirt itself is of higher quality than a normal T-shirt. So quality is a big thing. Knowledge sharing, the fact that we had, and the way we had guests here sharing their insights, their experiences about what they've gone through in relation to leadership, what they see around change and leadership, about embracing change and navigating the journey, about going from email to email, meeting to meeting. But they were sharing the knowledge of how they've handled things and what they're seeing today in the market. And over 4 years, things have changed as well. And I brought some of the guests back, and I'll probably bring some other guests back right from the beginning into doing new episodes again because things have changed a lot, which is really interesting to see. The other words, well, it's 2 words, of course, again, or 3 actually, the voice of impact. So it's the ability to have your voice heard. And so if you think about my voice journey with the tumour and then bouncing back from that, but it's about me having my voice heard in this podcast. It's about my guest voices being heard, but also for the listeners, it's about them developing their leadership voice to move forward and help them become the leaders that they need to be and that they deserve to be. It is important for us all when we're reaching milestones that we do celebrate. So it's also key that we take time out to reflect on the journey as well. Things like what went well and what we could have done differently and what we now do differently going forward. Once we've done that, then it's time to reset, put a new action plan in place, maybe set some new goals, and making changes on what we are wanting to do going forward. But then the next key is you taking massive action. And taking massive action is all good because you can have all the plans, you can do all the reflection, you can do all the lessons. That's all great, but it means nothing until you do something with it. So I've already started celebrating and reflecting and putting plans in place to reset the podcast, moving things forward. And there are exciting times ahead for the podcast. And I actually look forward to bringing more episodes, more world-class leaders to you through me interviewing them and also doing more Ask Denis episodes where I share topics and answer the listeners' questions around leadership and change. So I want to say thank you to our listeners for tuning into the show and tuning in on a regular basis all around the world. It's amazing to see the different geographies or different countries people are based who are listening to the podcast. I also want to thank the listeners who are sharing the Leadership is Changing podcast to their networks around the globe. And I'm going to ask you to please keep sharing this podcast with people because it is becoming a go-to asset for a lot of people in relation to the knowledge around leadership is changing. Thank you to my guests who have been willing to share their stories and leadership journeys. Thank you to my support crew, the production team, the graphics team, people have been helping me pull this together. Thank you to my partner Mary for your love, support, and helping me with the podcast. It's been it's really, really quite cool. And for some of you, I may have shared this with you, but for some of you, you may not know this. But sometimes we've got ChatGPT and people put their things in ChatGPT to get titles and things like that. I listen to and take notes as I'm doing the interviews, and there are different things that keep coming up, themes. But sometimes it's just this one sentence they may say, or just a few words, and you go, that's the title. Then I always run it by Mary, and I may go to her with 1, 2, or 3 kind of titles, options, and then I get some honest feedback from Mary, which is all good, and I change them or I run with it, or she may come up with some other suggestions as well. So it's really quite cool in partnering with her and bringing this podcast to you. So listeners, look, it will be really great if you can help put a rating or a comment in relation to the podcast on Apple and a rating on Spotify. I don't think you can put a comment on Spotify at this stage, but it actually helps the podcast a lot in doing so. So I'm so grateful for the journey of going from the tumor and not knowing what was going to happen to my voice and to my life, to then finding out it was benign and it was all good and being given a second chance of life, to then launching the podcast 4 years ago, and then on to releasing it and getting a number 1 rating 2 or 3 times, and actually being a global podcast with people coming to listen to it. So to all of you, thank you so much. It's always a real pleasure in bringing this podcast to you. So as I say every week, here's a call to action, and that is for you to download. Go to the show notes. You'll see a link there. Click on that link and download the 10 ways to lead in today's world. Review that document, the 10 main themes that we talk about, the 42 strategic insights. That's come from interviewing nearly 300 leaders, I should say, and this podcast and the insights, the themes. Amazing what people are sharing. What I'd like you to do is review the document and all those different 10 themes and 42 strategic insights, and then understand where you are with each one of those different themes or those insights. And then what you might need to do to bridge the gap if some of those things are missing. And so then that actually helps you. Well, listeners, that's it for this episode. It's always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for joining me on the Leadership is Changing podcast. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.